It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
Hello, I'm Mike Kerner, in for Gary Shorman this week. You're watching The Forum. And this week, our guest is Troy Waymaster, state representative here in the state of Kansas. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
We've got a lot to talk about because you just...
A lot happened.
Yeah, I know. You went through an exhaustive time down in Topeka. How is that working in Topeka and trying to do farming and ranching at the same time and going back and forth and working juggling all those plates and balls?
Well, luckily, when the Constitution was drafted for the state of Kansas, they put the time frame for the legislative session to be in the winter months when there isn't a lot of farming going on. So actually it works out very well for me being in Topeka from January until about May. And then right now, since I've come back home, we're getting ready to start planting milo and get things ready for wheat harvest. So the timing actually works out very well for me. Now, since I'm the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, there are times that I do need to make a trip back to Topeka and attend a meeting for a day or two. But throughout the rest of the year, I mean, it works out very, very well.
And thank God it's a family farm. You all can pitch in, right?
Yes. Yeah, we all pitch in and do our part.
In the Russell area?
Yes.
Okay,
Russell, and we also have some land in Barton County.
Very good. I just want to make sure everybody knows that, and you kind of represent this area. Real quick, so people that don't know you out there, which area do you represent? What's the territory?
Well, I represent the 109th Kansas House District, which pretty much 281 is the main artery, as I like to say, in my district. I have 7 counties, the entire counties of Russell, Osborne, and Smith, and then portions of Jewell, Lincoln, Barton, and Rush. Okay. And so that's my entire district. I always say that it goes from the Nebraska-Kansas border to almost Oklahoma.
Wow, so you got some big territory to cover.
It's a big territory.
And do you do town halls a lot?
Usually during the legislative session, we schedule a town hall in every single county. And actually this year I actually held 2 in Barton County, but we generally have anywhere from 9 to 10 town halls during the legislative session.
So you've been in Topeka now this year. Session's done. You guys wrapped that up, I think, May 4th.
Yes.
School finance was one of the big ones this year.
It was the big one.
Let's talk about that because you had to work your way around that quite a bit. You were part of that.
Yeah. Actually, last year during the 2017 legislative session, we had to work around education finance. We felt that we had passed an education finance formula that would have sufficed the court. However, on October 2nd, the Supreme Court came back with their opinion saying that we were not adequately funding K-12 education. So we had to go back, actually during the interim, after the opinion was given by the Kansas Supreme Court, I was then appointed to a special committee on the K-12 education finance by the Speaker of the House, and we had 3 meetings in the month of December, 1 to go through the opinion, 2, see what avenues may happen if we have to look at an 18% cut to basically put the amount in that the plaintiffs wanted to have. And then we also looked at other alternatives. But then when we started session in January, that was the overwhelming issue that we had to address because we had a time frame. The Supreme Court told us that they would like to have their formula back to them by April 30th, and then they would render their decision by June 30th. So it was a time crunch starting in January, working through the committee process, the legislative process itself, getting something passed onto the governor, and then to the court by April 30th.
Now, how long have you been in the legislature? You've seen this over and over and over.
Every single year we've dealt with education finance.
Not necessarily with the Supreme Court, but this time around with Supreme Court. So, so it's been a little different this time around.
My first session was in 2013, and it seems like every single year the overwhelming topic has always been K-12 education, which it should be. It is 52%, well, it was 52% of the state's budget. So it is the largest item that we do budget for. But yeah, every single year we have had to address some type of issue with K-12 education finance.
I know that some years they've even kept you all down there even way past the session.
Yeah, actually last year was one of those. We actually tied the longest session in history. I'm not proud to say that I have been a part of both of those, but yeah, they lasted over 115 days.
So what do you anticipate coming out of it this year when we're all said and done?
With the Supreme Court?
Yeah, yes.
Well, my anticipation is that they'll look at the $534 million that we're putting into K-12 education, and that they will deem as being adequately funding K-12 education. There's only so much the state can do within its budget. And obviously, we overrode the governor's tax veto last year to basically put back in place what had taken place in 2012. But those are revenues coming in, and we're not totally certain about what those revenues will bring. And so we only work with a finite number. And right now, even with the $534 million plan that was passed, we're looking in 2021 of being in a deficit situation at our current spending levels.
Was it kind of odd, strange, being down in Topeka and in midterm you're getting a different governor?
It was very odd. In fact, the chairwoman for the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which is my counterpart in the Senate, both she and I, our revisers or the attorneys for the legislature, came to us and said, well, we've received the governor's budget. Do you want us to go ahead and start processing it? And both of us kind of looked at her and said, which governor? Because at that point, Governor Brownback was still in office, but he had been directing a lot of duties to Lieutenant Governor then Collier. And so it was different this year because we had anticipated in December that Governor Brownback would have been confirmed by the U.S. Senate and would have moved on to his post as at-large ambassador. And instead, he ended up giving the State of the State speech. And we had all anticipated that then Governor Collier would be giving it. But no, Governor Brownback gave it, and then it was only like a couple weeks later, then the confirmation went to the U.S. Senate, and then Jeff Collier was sworn in as governor, and we basically had what I called a State of the State 2.0. And actually that was much more received than Governor Brownback's State of the State speech in early January.
Well, one of the things I want to stop or ask you about before we go into the break, we were talking about kids and education, but you had received an award this year. It was a distinguished award for children advocacy, right?
Yes, it was the Kansas Children's Service League, and I was awarded an award for, along with 3 other legislators, for our advocacy and our actions that we did during the 2017 legislative session. What it basically came down to is we had some what's called temporary assistance for needy family money that comes from the federal government, and we directed those funds to programs that benefit the Kansas Children's Service League. And so we were awarded with that in late April.
And you were the only one from Western Kansas.
Yes, I was the only one from Western Kansas. There were 2 senators from Topeka, another representative from Kansas City, Kansas area, but I was the only one that received that award from Western Kansas.
Is it always divided up equally where it's 2 senators, 2 legislators, representatives?
They just kind of decide on how many awards they want to give out on an annual basis. It just so happened that they wanted to recognize all 4 of us for the actions that we committed for those dollars to go towards the Kansas Children's Service League in 2017.
Very good. Well, we've got a lot of things still to talk about because it was a long session and a lot happened. So
a lot happened.
We'll get back to more of that out in the second half of the show. Again, this is The Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman. The Forum brought to you by Hayes Med.
Hayes Med is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, Hayes Med is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout Western Kansas. Hayes Med, helping people be healthy.
Eagle Communications is your ultimate business partner. We provide business class phone with customizable features and fast, reliable internet. Your knowledgeable team at Technology Solutions has a broad base of IT services to meet your needs. Let the experts at Marketing Solutions get your message to the right people on the best platforms. The only piece missing is your business. Call Eagle Communications today at 877-61-EAGLE.
Welcome back to the Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman. The Forum brought to you by Hayes Med. By the way, if you've got a show idea, Gary would love to hear from you. Just email him at gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. Our guest this week, Troy Waymaster. He is a state representative here in the state of Kansas. Want to thank him for coming in and serving.
Thank you again.
And all that you've went through this year in the session. Some really good things happened, especially recently. The mural. Let's talk about the mural in the State House.
Yeah, actually that was just unveiled. The state Capitol Commission decided to honor obviously the prevailing Supreme Court case, U.S. Supreme Court case, in regards to Brown versus the Board of Education. And so what they did is they commissioned a mural to be painted outside of the old Supreme Court room in the state Capitol. And that was just unveiled last Thursday.
Wow.
And so it's another mural. If anybody has toured the state capitol, there are murals on every floor of the building, and some of them are widely known, especially the John Brown mural on the second floor. And so this is just another mural that has been added to the history of the state of Kansas.
Very good. So people have a chance to go down there and check that out. I want to talk about the revenue this year. Boy, that was really up. Was that a surprise?
It was not a surprise because last year when we were going through, I don't serve on the tax committee, but when the tax committee would have the Department of Revenue come in and look at different scenarios as far as a tax plan that we either voted on or didn't vote and passed last year, they would have different numbers. It would vary on each time they would come in as far as income taxes, corporate taxes. Obviously, the one that seemed to cause a lot of angst with the people of the state of Kansas was that LLCs didn't have to pay any income tax. Their numbers, if you put them back on the tax rolls, varied from what the projections from the research office was. And so it was subjective on what those numbers were going to be. But then, like I mentioned in the first part of the segment, when the override of the governor's veto occurred, then obviously our financial footing for the state of Kansas went up. And then also, I think there was a lot more confidence with the citizens of the state of Kansas, and they were willing, they went out and bought more stuff. I mean, sales tax receipts were up. Income tax receipts obviously were up because there are modifications made to income taxes. But obviously, the months coming after the override of the governor's veto have been exceeding the targets that were set by the consensus revenue group, and some are just anticipating that will continue.
With more money coming in, does it give you a chance now to fund a lot more projects?
Well, and that's one thing that we tried to identify this year in the Appropriations Committee. When we met in November, we have a joint committee between the House and the Senate, and I was the chairman of that committee this year. This interim, it'll be Senator McGinn, who is the chairwoman of Senate Ways and Means. Anyway, so we had the agencies and departments come in to us and address the committee, and they came in with $274 million in additional spending. Some of those, I would say, was a wish list that has never been asked for and never been funded by the state of Kansas. And so we had to go through each of the agencies and departments' budgets, identify what is crucial, what is needed, and if it was something that we didn't feel like it needed to be funded, then we didn't fund it. But we also always had the overlooming issue with K-12 education finance, how we were going to address that. So we did try to do a lot of things this year. I mean, we put about $3.4 million into water resources. We did stop a transfer that has been going on for the last couple of years between KDOT and K-12 education transportation. And that was about $102 million that's going to be retained to the Kansas Department of Transportation so they can complete some of the projects for the T-Works program, which actually is in on its last few years. Because if you recall, back in, I believe it was 2016, they had to delay 23 projects from the T-Works program because there was no funding. And so we directed that money to stay with the Kansas Department of Transportation to complete those projects. Some of the other things we looked at, we also looked at mental health and social services. It seemed like a lot of the cuts that happened in the last few years had dire constraints with the mental health facilities in the state of Kansas and also with social services. And so our social services chairwoman held committee, brought it back to appropriations. We then tried to decide exactly what needed to be funded. Department of Children and Family had been in the press for the last few months for missing children, children sleeping in offices when they were taken away from their homes. And what it came down to is they just didn't have the funding. So we had to identify every single agency and department and decide what was crucial.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to get to real quick is we had some extra money in the state of Kansas, and one item that was kind of overlooked in the legislature, you were able to fully fund the $194 million, the CAPERS payment that was kind of deferred. And that'll be for 19 and 20.
Yes, that was for 19 and 20. And what we did on that is the Governor Collier came back with a governor's budget adjustment and wanted to make $82 million of the $194 million payment. The House position was we want to make the $194 million because the sooner we pay off the unfunded liability that we have with CAPERS, the better off the trust fund will be and also the better off the state of Kansas will be. I mean, if you look at the portfolios and you look at if we made the $194 million payment this year, our payment next year is $77 million. I mean, that's how critical it was to make that $194 million payment. The problem is that once we got the education finance and everything else put together, there was no way we could make the 194. So when we went into conference committee between the House and the Senate on the budget, we came to a compromise that we would make the $82 million in July 1st. And then we would look at the receipts, and if we were above receipts, then we would make one payment for the additional, what would that be, 100 and...
I'm not that good at math today, so...
I think maybe about $92 million. And then we make that in July based off of the June 30th receipts, and then in 2019, based off of the June 30th receipts, then we make that payment in fiscal year 2020, so that payment is fully funded.
It's good that it's paid off. I mean,
we need to. Like I said, we have an unfunded liability that we've had for quite some time. It wasn't just the last few years. This has been going on for decades of us not making a payment and adding that to the unfunded liability. And we just felt the need to get that taken care of. Because like I said, I mean, it only benefits the state and also the beneficiaries if we don't have that unfunded liability.
And now the last one I want to ask you, a big question, it's kind of a big topic. It's being talked about in Kansas a lot. It's been talked about for a long time. Governor Collier just passed, it was an alternative, let me make sure I get this right, Crop Research Act that allows Kansas Department of Agriculture to oversee the cultivation of industrial hemp in the state of Kansas.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Your name was brought up on this because you were on a advisory committee.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you probably did that because Russell is one of the areas that's been talked about, right?
Yeah, actually this bill originated in the Senate, which is the first that has ever happened. This was the first year that it's ever originated in the Senate. We've had these bills in the House, and actually, I believe it was in 2015, I was supposed to carry the bill on the House floor. Leadership didn't want to have the debate, so we never carried it. And then we've passed amendments. We've had other bills that have passed, but have always basically was welcomed by a slam door on the Senate side. So this year, the Ag Chairman on the Senate committee drafted a bill on hemp research. And what he found out is when he was asking for insight or he was being contacted by individuals throughout the state, the majority of those people were from Russell County. And they actually had a plan that has been kind of constructed through this advocacy group in Russell County, along with Russell County Economic Development. And so basically, for everything that the individuals in Russell County have done, he said, we're going to go ahead and put Russell County specifically in the bill as the test plot. And anyway, so it passed the Senate, came over to the House. I testified in the House Ag Committee in favor of the bill. And one of the questions I was asked is, why is Russell County listed in the bill? I mean, it being my home county, I had to explain the reason why Russell County was specifically named. So when they decided to actually work the bill, then there was an amendment brought forward that Russell County would stay in the bill specifically, but it would open it up to all the other 104 counties across the state of Kansas under the discretion of the Secretary of Ag, whether or not she would grant a pilot system in another county. But Russell County will definitely have a test pilot plot.
And when is that supposed to be? Is it regulated? I mean, you're on the advisory.
Right.
What you have to give feedback back to the Capitol?
Well, actually, we were just named on the committee just, a week ago when they had the hemp research, session at K-State. And actually, there's like 175 people that attended the 2 sessions that was put on by the Department of Ag. And so that's where the announcement was made, who is going to be sitting on this pre-advisory committee, who basically will be setting up the regulations and the rules off of industrial hemp research. And we have not had our first meeting yet, but I have been with many meetings with individuals who are in favor of it. I've gotten a lot of phone calls once they found out that I was on the pre-advisory committee. I've had meetings with individuals from the Department of Ag, including Jackie McClaskey, who is the Secretary of Agriculture. And so it's in the infancy stage right now, and we're trying to set up those regulations and those rules and moving forward. Because when I was on the phone with the Undersecretary for the Department of Agriculture just about a week and a half ago, a lot of the questions that I had, they have themselves. So we've got to work through it so that we can start having the planning starting in 2019.
Well, you said this intrigues me. You said Russell was named in the bill. Why? What was the reason for Russell being in this and being so I guess forefront?
You know, really, it was a community effort. I think the reason why the community got so behind this is because other states, obviously, with the not the most recent farm bill, because that didn't pass, but the one that was passed previously did allow for research on industrial hemp. So some of the other states have already been taking proactive measures, namely the one that's always mentioned is the state of Kentucky and what they did. And actually an individual from the state of Kentucky addressed those when they had the session at K-State. And so I think the community effort was looking at an alternative crop, because right now we're looking at extremely low prices on milo, corn, wheat. Even soybeans is less than what it's been in the last few years. And then also you're having the economy of Russell, which is contingent on agriculture and oil production. And oil production is coming back, but it did have a low spot. And so the economy was hurting. And I think they were being proactive and was looking at an alternative way or alternative crop that could be grown, and that ended up being industrial hemp. And so they had forums at the Dream Theater in Russell. I even went to a meeting about seed production with Great Bend Co-op once they took over AGCO, and the one product that somebody brought up was industrial hemp and whether or not they would supply the seeds for it. Well, I mean, that was before the session, before anything is passed, so obviously that was not going, at that point, you really couldn't have much discussion about it. But it gained a lot of steam this session, and we wanted to be not at the forefront because other states have done it, but we don't want to be the last state to do it. And so there was a lot of momentum this year to pass a bill in regards to research of industrial hemp.
And I knew there's a lot of cycles with it. Within 1 year, they can grow multiple crop rotations on it, and it uses a lot less water.
Yes, and that's one thing. I mean, you're looking at also, some of the counties in the state are looking at drought again. And so what kind of crop can you grow that will use less water? And actually in some of the committee meetings that I went to, it was you could grow industrial hemp with the same or less water than sorghum. And sorghum has been a very productive crop out here in western Kansas. And so I think that was just, took the community effort of trying to identify another crop, get behind it, see it pass, and now moving forward as a possible crop in the state of Kansas.
Very good. We're out of time. Oh, one quick question for you. Everybody else is running for governor. Are you going to try too?
I am not, no.
Not
Not yet.
I thought I'd ask you that one too. Troy Waymaster is our state representative. I want to thank him for coming in and joining us today. Again, this is The Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman. Thanks for joining us today. The Forum brought to you by Hayes Med. Have yourself a great day.